right or wrong, believers or unbelievers, there is no condemnation or judgment from us in this moment. If you or someone you know is struggling with an unplanned pregnancy or struggling with decisions that they've made, look to rtl.org/pregnancy-help or call 800-57-WOMAN. That's 800-579-6626, or for men, 877-LIFE-OPT, 877-543-3678, or you can text for help, 800-712-4357. The video that we're going to review today is about the topic of abortion, and it's going to mention a website called heartchanger.com, and that is probably a good resource as well. I assume it is. I just didn't have the time to actually check that out, so I referenced the Right to Life information because I'm sure that they're gonna have good resources and be able to help. So if you or anybody you know is struggling with something like this, now's the time. Get help before you make a decision you can't undo. Mm-hmm. And if you have made that decision already, there are also resources for you to help you if you're struggling in that.
Yeah.
Okay. So to begin, some of you might be familiar with the ministry of Living Waters. Mm-hmm. They put out a video at the beginning of September doing man-on-the-street style interviews discussing the topic of abortion. I'll be sure to link the video in the show notes. And you may want to stop this podcast now and go to that link, or go to heartchanger.com and watch the video. It's about an hour. Mm-hmm. And if you're familiar with their ministry, they have they've got a bunch of different things. One of them is called 180. Mm-hmm. And another one is just generally the method is called Way of the Master.
Yeah.
And they have a class that I actually took back when I first became a Christian on this method of witnessing to people, evangelizing, that's called Way of the Master.
Yeah. Ray Comfort, he does a lot of work with that, and he's great. He's got a lot of good insight as far as, he's been doing this for years, so
yep.
Great resource.
Yep, it's good. I think others have been involved with it too. Anyway.
Yeah. I can think of some people, but yeah, I won't go into that.
The one question... the video is called The One Question, and the one question is, what is it? Is it a bundle of cells? Is it a human life? So the first thing the host begins saying is, finish this sentence. It's okay to kill a baby in the womb when, and then he hands the mic over to the person. Mm-hmm. So right away, I don't like the question. Okay. This could be considered a good question, but it depends on what your goals are. If your goal is to be right about something, you don't need to interact with other people to do that, right? You can just look in the mirror and go, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, and then you'll be right, and then that'll be enough. Okay, but if you want someone to change their heart about something, you have to kind of meet them where they are. Mm-hmm. And people don't like when you assume the answer in the question. It's kind of a misdirection. It's like, finish this sentence. It's okay to kill a baby in the womb when is the question you ask, like, how do you feel about beating your wife?
So to be fair too, I guess I don't know the other way either, but it's possible that that question could have been a follow-up to a series of other questions. Like you're correct in saying that it starts out the video with them asking that, but it could be that the way it's edited, that's halfway through a conversation.
Right. And that's we're just the purpose of this podcast is just to react to it. So I'm just telling you, I'm writing down my feelings as they occurred.
Yeah, because our listeners could watch it and feel the same way. Yeah.
So how do you feel about beating your wife? By answering the question, you're admitting that you beat your wife. Or in this case, you're admitting that you believe that the life inside of the mother is a baby. Okay. And they don't believe that. Right? So you can fool any number of people with parlor tricks like that, but they have in their minds from school or society or their family or whoever that life is not about, is what you perceive and not what it is. So you have to address that first, right? The concern that life is about what it is and not their perception. I personally don't appreciate that question. Even though I probably agree with the speaker on the matter of abortion, I wouldn't want to be asked that question. It begins with the phrase that by answering that, I confess the opposite of my belief. So it's a logic puzzle at best and a parlor trick at worst. Now, that question might look like someone who's a pro-abortion atheist asking me, since God's not real, why is abortion wrong? Right? So I want to say, like, I did enjoy the video and everything like that. I'm just reacting to that one question, right? I just think that we, as a group, we should avoid sort of saying things like, it's okay to kill a baby when, and then, you know what I mean? Because it's not really, they don't see it that way, you know, and I just think it's good to sort of see people want to be heard from their actual position, from how they actually feel about something.
Yeah, certainly don't lead with that question.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's where I'm getting at there.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So do you have any thoughts, anything you want to add before I continue?
Well, I know there's a kind of an introduction to the video. There's a lot of attention-grabbing stuff, attention-grabbing statements, both from the person who's doing the interview and the people who are giving feedback, talking about it. But really, I wish I would have looked this up, but about 5 minutes roughly is where it starts. And the actual documentary, it leads, like we already covered, what is it, that question. But then pretty quickly on in the beginning, it starts out with, and I think that he does lead with this question sometimes and again, I'm assuming this, but I'm just picturing him going up, because I've actually seen some behind the scenes as to how they do their interviews. They'll stop people on the street and they say, they're very open and transparent about what they're going to do. They're like, I want to interview you, ask a series of questions. They kind of give them a heads up, like, it's this kind of content. Like, are you comfortable with that? And they also have some kind of incentive. Like, if you answer some questions, I've got this gift card for you. It's yours. At any point, if you feel uncomfortable, like, you can just, because if you'll notice, there's some people, you only hear like one line from them and then you don't hear anything else. That's either there wasn't anything, I guess, worth putting in a documentary, or that person like bailed. Started off and then they bailed, which is understandable.
That's cool, giving them a gift card and stuff to listen, because some of them, they seem to stick around way past where I would think that they would.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know? And then there's even one lady who's like, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here with this, but she's like, okay, if we're going to go this route, I'm done talking, because and it was understandable because it was a very sensitive subject that they were covering. But anyway, I all that to say, I like one question that it seems like they probably started with, because in my logic behind this, thinking they started with this, is you can't pop this question later on after you've already revealed the subject you're talking about. Otherwise, the jig is up and they don't have a genuine answer. So they, pretty early on in this documentary, they say, would you kill it? With no context, right? Would you kill it? And then it's funny to see the montage of different examples. Like, the one lady's like, well, yeah, if we're talking about the dance floor or something, you know, she's being funny. And so there's a little bit of humor there. But then most people are just really confused, like, kill what? And obviously you can't answer a question like that until you have the context. And then they lead into, they give this example, would you blow up a building if you weren't certain that there might still be people inside? So kind of going to what you were addressing earlier, like, you're assuming that there's a baby, that it's a baby, when that other person's worldview is like, well, I don't think it's a baby. I don't agree with that. That's not my, I think it's pretense that is the right term for that. So different worldviews, but the argument for that, would you blow up a building if you weren't sure if there's a person inside? It's speaking to the question of, okay, you may not agree that it's a baby with me, but what if it is? If there's even a slight chance that it could be a baby, say we don't agree on this, but if there's a slight chance that I'm right and you're wrong, should we have a discussion around it before we just, you know, like, I think the example is, you see a curtain move, you think the building's been cleared out, but if there's a slightest thought that, you know, it's a building that you've been contracted to blow up and remove, that there could be a person inside, wouldn't you want to remove all doubt before going through with it?
Right. And that question I like a lot more.
Yeah.
A lot more. I like that question way more than...
I feel like they may have started with that, but I can't prove that.
Well, right. And in any case, they ask it in that order in the video.
Right.
But they asked first. They asked the question that I didn't like. Then they asked the question that I really love.
Yep,
I
you're
love
right.
that question. That's a great question.
There was an editorial choice at some point to lead with that.
Well, plus most people that aren't sociopaths would not blow up a building if they thought there was a person inside. Most people, even the most hardened people toward the Lord,
I think there was one
would say, "Well, no, I wouldn't
one
do
lady
that."
they actually interviewed though that she's like, I 100% believe that it's a human being in there, and I have no problem with it.
I know that was so like
So, and she was so adamant.
yeah, it was a little machismo, I thought. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're getting ahead of
Sure.
ourselves. So yeah, that was my next point. That the question I like better because we're getting at the heart of the issue, whether or not it's actually a baby. Is it life? Is it a ball of mush?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if it's not life, if it's not really a baby, it's just a ball of mush. It has no value.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll talk about that. So then the host talks about the 4 differentiations between preborns and newborns. Before I get to the 4 differentiations of preborns and newborns, do you have any thoughts before we get to that section?
Yeah, actually, I've got some notes here that the difference is we probably just have a different order of notes, but I'll say some things and you can tell me like I've got more on that later or something. You
what we should have done was compared notes.
Oh, we're learning. This is a learning process, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, we actually had that conversation before recording that we need to start doing that. So
yeah, be prepared for some unification of notes. People.
We're gonna kick it up a notch, the notch that we probably should have started with. But regardless, it's a work in progress. We are a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
I always jokingly tell people, I love that joke that says, "Well, I didn't go to college or anything." I technically can't say that, but what I can say is, I didn't go to college or anything that is really a college that people think is a legitimate college. So, like legitimately the college I graduated from, not the college I started from, but the college I graduated from no longer exists. So take that for what it's worth, I guess.
Wow. You got the degree and burned the place to the ground.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
But anyway, so I've got a couple of things here, and it said, so is it a baby in the womb? That's kind of what you just covered. Most people who answer honestly will at least admit that they're not sure. Like, I would say the people who say definitely it is not are usually citing some kind of source of some expert or something in their opinion that is saying it is not a baby. So whatever your response is, it's blank. Whatever you believe it to be, then at one point, they ask this question: at what point does it become a baby? Because your argument maybe in the womb is different than what it is outside of the womb. So at what point? That's a very good question, I think, to lead somebody logically through. Because if they're on that side of it's not a baby, then ask them, just like the documentary asks, at what point does it become a baby? Even if you're not sure at what stage it is or isn't a baby, then why make the decision to kill it before you know that for certain? Like, we can go off of somebody's opinion, but have you seen that? Whatever you think it is, have you seen that in the womb? Have you taken the time to look at it, or are you just going on? Because if I'm in charge of blowing up a building, again, going to that example, if I'm not certain, it would behoove me to not take somebody else's word for it, but to check and have evidence before me. Not to say, well, I talked to the expert on demolitions and he said there's no way there's anybody in that building. This is an important enough issue that you should know for yourself. So I'll leave it at that and let you continue.
I would want to be the person who was in charge of it, who saw it for myself. I would want to be the person who went to the top of the building, looked in every crevice, went to the second floor, down. You know what I mean? I would want to be the person who personally. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep. And for the
leave
sake
no
of
doubt in my own mind, I would never want to trust somebody else.
For the sake of the analogy too, and not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but you could easily make the analogy that, well, if there's the owner of that building, they legally own it. They can say, I want this building demolished right now, and the time for checking and doing all this stuff, I demand that it be blown up right now. But why would it behoove even people listening to that person to make sure there's nobody in there? Is because there's other lives at stake. He can say it's my building, but he doesn't get to have ownership over the other people that could be harmed or killed in the explosion of that building. So that's part of the analogy.
So the host talks about the 4 differentiations of preborns and newborns. They were size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Size, asking, how can something so small be considered human?
Mm-hmm.
If size has nothing to do with the value of the human, how can we say that the life inside of a mother is less valuable?
Yeah.
Because size doesn't have anything to do with value.
Yeah. Are children less human than adults because they're smaller in size? Are people who have dwarfism, or I don't even know what the technical term for it is anymore, because I feel like that's getting more and more not PC to refer to people certain ways.
Yeah.
But they're not any less human because they can't see over a counter or something like that.
Development. The question is, how can something that's not fully developed be human?
Mm-hmm.
If it has a brain that doesn't function, if its brain doesn't function in the same capacity as a newborn, how can it be called a person? The video makes the point that the human body develops well into its teen years and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, my wife regularly reminds me that my brain is only recently fully developed. Wow. I mean, to be fair, hers too, but women typically, they say they develop a little bit quicker than guys.
I was going to say, are you even talking at the time, or does she just walk into the room and say, I just want to let you know your brain is not...
Well, she'll jokingly talk about, even when... So it's kind of like a backhanded compliment. She'll talk about how, man, things that we used to struggle with in our marriage, you don't struggle with it anymore. And she's like, it's because your brain's finally developed.
Oh, that's nice of her to say. I feel like my wife would just laugh uncontrollably if she heard that. So if the body develops well into its teen years and beyond, how is the life inside of a mother any different, right? If it is not fully developed even outside of the womb, where's the line, right? Which is what you just talked about.
Yeah, I think there's one person that was interviewed that says, and so we're bridging what you're talking about with what I left off with, and that is this idea of if it's something else other than a baby, at what point does it become a baby? And she says when it starts to develop, I guess. And she kind of gives that half-hearted answer, but then he goes on to ask her, when does it begin to develop? And she can't remember. I think she throws out is it 3 months?
Heartbeat, I think she says something like that.
Yeah, something about the heartbeat, and he tells the heartbeat develops at this, but really when it begins to develop is conception.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Environment, asking, is the unborn person really a person if they're not in the world yet? But if our value is determined by location, then value changes when we move from place to place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A baby can be taken not necessarily right at the 9-month line, right? It can be taken a little bit earlier, a little bit later. It's basically the same. It's just about location at that point.
And I think to speak from that viewpoint, that it's, somehow not a living human being when it's in the womb, it really is this general principle of what I cannot see, I have a hard time valuing. The Bible speaks to how it says, my eye affecteth my heart. And even Jesus himself is quoted saying in one of the Gospels that when he saw the multitude, he was moved with compassion. Not that he wasn't compassionate about them generally before, because it's God, right? We know he loves us more than anyone. But seeing people with your own eyes, it compels you to action, loving action, right? And that is what I think why this is such a hot button. Because when you talk about it this way, that point that you just brought up of like your location, people say like, well, yeah, like even though, you know, I guess technically you can make the case that at times in our past as a people, like on the planet Earth, people have said, well, these people living here matter less than these people over here. That has been argued, and that's been the source of wars in the past. But generally, it's accepted, at least by people who hold some kind of moral compass in their life. They say, yeah, it doesn't matter where you live geographically. But it's the reason why it's so hard to apply that same logic to a baby in the womb is I can't see this. You can kind of apply that to other countries too, which that's why less people are concerned with other people in the world because they can't see them. But that's why, like, even if you're not a believer, you say I'm listening to this podcast, I don't claim the same faith in God that you guys believe. You could at least say, you know, when I took a trip over here, for many Christians, they'll take a short-term mission trip somewhere, and they say it impacts them greatly when they go and see other people. And at the end of the day, you realize, like, even though these people speak differently, they look a little bit differently than me, we're all humans. We all have the same struggles, all the same fears, and you realize, like, it just broadens your worldview. So if anything, you're listening to this topic about abortion and is it a baby, is it not a baby, maybe you could stand to have your worldview broaden a little as to, I should give this a chance.
Mm-hmm. The last point he makes is about the level of dependency, asking if something is so dependent on the mother, is it a human being because without the mom, it wouldn't survive?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the most interesting one to me, personally. If as people who are against abortion, we allow that idea to go unchallenged, there are many, usually wearing suits and ties, with $400 haircuts, employed at buildings with seals on the front of them.
Richmond, north of Richmond.
I don't know.
Maybe.
I was implying the government. The usually wearing suits and ties, who would love to deprioritize people in the name of population control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's movements right now, even as close as Canada. You know, that's more real for, depending on where you're at in the country. It's very real for us because we actually, most people don't know this, where we're at in Michigan is slightly north of the southernmost part of Canada. So we're really close to Canada, but just across the lake where Canada exists, you can go in there and they're really ramping up this idea of at a certain point, you matter a little less, so we're going to try to make ways for people to have like assisted suicide. And that's the other side of this is you can't just simply, it would be disingenuous of us to talk about abortion today and not talk about how, you know, it's not just babies in the womb that we're advocating for, it's all of life. You and I, you listener, you may have a difference of opinion as to what constitutes life or what applies that to. You don't think it applies to something in the womb, but you can at least say that people who are outside the womb, such as elderly people, we need to apply the same standard to all of life.
And care for
all of life. Yeah.
That's it, right? It's like, comes down to, well, if they're, the problem is they're so dependent.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't have them, then less dependency would be required, and that would be better.
Darwinism would say survival of the fittest, right? So if you have people, it's just those people were born, sorry about your luck. You're born this way. You're born with disabilities, deficiencies, all those things. And but we are the only creature on this earth that care for those rather than just devouring them or leaving them be, and we should never get to that point. We should always care for one another. If
size, level of development, and environment don't matter, right? If we argued and we win those arguments, if those arguments are eliminated, degree of development can be used as an argument for eliminating people who don't serve society. You might think that'll never happen, but it's not a big leap from one idea to the next.
Yeah.
We already established environment doesn't matter. So we've accepted that what's in a womb and what's out of a womb is equally valuable. Right? The world would love to find some way to measure value apart from God.
Yeah, absolutely. The world wants to be the end-all, be-all standard for these things.
It opens up all sorts of opportunities for power.
So say, for example, Dan, if somebody wanted to say, this person is an essential worker, but this person is not. To borrow some terminology from a recent event that some of us experienced. If you can measure a person by their usefulness to society, you can measure them on a scale, and that means you can control their movements and their thoughts, and you think, no, that wouldn't happen, but they already try to do it now. Yeah.
Right? If that weren't the case, then social media would not be curated.
So this thought just popped in my head, but it goes right along with what you're saying. Think about the highest paying jobs in America. Now, I didn't do research on this, so I can't tell you extreme facts. All I can tell you is these certain jobs are up there. If you look at entertainment, if you look at celebrities, like specifically A-list celebrities, sports athletes, we're talking about people who achieve fame, celebrity status because of what they do in life, and then but in turn, they are cultural influencers. Our society today, based on how much they're paying people, they value cultural influencers, YouTubers even, you could say that, you could make that case, over people who are like doctors, police officers, teachers, people who are saving lives and enriching their lives. You could say pastors, like, not saying that pastors need to be the most high paid individuals either, but man, they're doing work that transcends this life and goes to eternity. And so just put that in perspective for you. You can see how much society values certain people over others. If you take a step back, say there's a nuclear fallout, God forbid, or something, and that everybody's trying to scrap around for survival. There would be certain things that'd be way more important all of a sudden than what was important before the fallout. But it just goes to show you, like, we can't even trust society or government to show us who is most valuable, because you can already tell by the who gets paid what, that's already out of whack. The priorities are not there. Yeah,
you'll never come to an agreement on it. So then you have to start talking about who gets to decide.
Yep.
And then who gets to decide who gets to decide.
Yep.
And so forth. The conversation around this issue comes down to value. People have value. Where we get the value from is the question. A child born to opulent parents is not more valuable than one born to destitute parents.
Right. Yep.
A child of one race or gender is not more or less valuable than another.
Yep. Those are things worth fighting for. Yep.
A person's value is not determined by how well they can serve society. If that's true, the elderly begin to lose their right to life as well.
Even children.
That may sound like an argument from a slippery slope, but explain to me, if value to a society is a measure of a man, how can a bedridden man who is a burden to the state with no hope of a better life serve society? Value is not determined by usefulness to society.
People's value should be from a fixed point.
It is from a fixed point.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we believe that, right?
Well, it's true whether we want to believe it or not.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. But, for somebody who needs convinced of it, not only is it, but it should be. Like, you argue that it's not, we're worse off for it.
add to that?
So I like that you included the 4 stages of development, or the 4. What is it called? The 4, not development, but
You're right. It is the 4 differentiations
the 4
of preborns and newborns.
Yes.
Again, those are size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency.
Yep. And if you can remember, the acronym they gave there was SLED. So if you're wondering, if you're trying to remember what those are, think of the word SLED: size,
Level of
development, environment, and
degree of
dependency. Yep. So those are good. I think I don't think I actually have anything in my notes on those, but I'm super glad that you covered it.
So then the host circulates a petition to allow abortions for children 3 months to a year old. He just wants to see if people are going to sign it, and of course they do. Right? I'm not a huge fan of man on the street interviews. Right? Prager did one recently asking about Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Right? When was Pearl Harbor? And people were like, the 80s? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Those are always embarrassing.
I mean, all it really shows, those are always embarrassing. Yeah. All it really shows is that people are stupid.
Mm-hmm. It would be nice to see unedited footage too, so you could get all the people who probably did know.
Right.
I don't want to accuse anybody. Honestly, I do not put any stock in. This is just my personal thing, but I don't put any stock in PragerU. But
oh, really?
Yeah, I don't. There's been some recent stuff about that organization that I don't care for. But anyway,
wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so not to say anything. What's important is do your research from all your sources. But yeah, so specifically those interviews, you never know like how they're edited and stuff. That's one reason why I chose to, or I was really looking forward to reviewing this movie, is I really trust, and like I said, I've seen some behind the scene footage as to how these interviews are conducted, and I think they're done really well and transparent and genuine. There's some editing, they rearrange some stuff around like anybody would do, but I feel like for the most part, if you watch the whole thing, you get the full picture. So, yeah. But anyway, not to come at it from a different angle, but I am saying like you absolutely, these in-person interviews take with a grain of salt, especially depending on who's doing them.
Yeah. I think like, I'm just saying I'm not a huge fan of them, in general. I mean, I get what they're trying to accomplish. They're just showing that people don't think, and that's been proven a million times, they show that people are stupid and that they don't think. And I get that, but idiots would sign a petition to paint over the Mona Lisa. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They just feel a social pressure, so they're going to sign whatever you know.
That idea of the petition thing is played out in this documentary as well.
Right? Yeah, yeah. Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla proved this when they got women to sign to end women's suffrage.
Yeah,
end the suffrage of women, and all these women were like, "I want to end the suffrage of women." And it's just, they prove that, people they don't really think, they just come up and sign stuff.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
In this case, he did get a few people that would sign it and everything like that. And he's like, I just think, like a year later, whatever. Mom, they're not wanted, they're burden to society, blah, blah, blah. People just sign it, it's like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then a little bit later in the video, he asks a question I really did like, which is whether or not murdering a human being was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great question because we establish what we as Christians have known for years, which is that God's law is written on our hearts. Even if some people believe that it's okay to kill some people, most people don't believe we should be able to kill all people.
Yeah.
Does feel like low-hanging fruit a little bit, but that's why it comes up so much, right? It's so if you say something is wrong, you're implying that there's a scale by which to judge right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean a moral law, right? This is not an original thought from me, right? Moral law implies that someone or something created it, and that moral being could be a person that created this moral law. But then we have to argue of that the merits of that individual over another, and from there the merits of the one who decides who is worthy of giving the moral law. So ultimately, the world is the one that decides and is the arbiter of a moral law on a case-by-case basis. And that's how you get what we have today, which are millions of little lowercase g gods walking around deciding for themselves what's right and wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because where your moral compass is, it's very important.
Yeah, and people are deciding what is right and wrong for themselves, and that's sort of the standard at this point.
Yeah, and this may not go a long way for our listeners who, again, may not come from the same worldview. They say, I don't necessarily believe in God or Jesus or all those things, or the Bible. I don't want to hear the Bible, but the Bible itself issues a strong warning against this type of thinking, because it says even God's own people, the nation of Israel, there was a place where you get to the book of Judges, and there's a statement that said, in that day, every man did what was right in his own eyes. And you read through that book, it's just chaos, and it gets increasingly worse. And the reason why it's called Judges is because every time God sends a judge, rights the ship, and then that judge dies or something, and then boom, they're right on the same path again. And you say, well, I don't believe in the Bible, but first of all, a lot of what's happened in the Bible, especially that of the Old Testament, there's historical documents. All those people really existed, and all those. You can even have historical evidence of those times and those events really happened. But furthermore, you can at least say, like, there's so many times throughout history, if you know anything about history, where people were doing what they thought to be right in that moment at time, but hundreds of years pass, and we look back at that and we say, well, I can obviously see that wasn't right, but to them, it seemed right at the time. Like even the events of World War II, the entire nation at that time was convinced that Jews, and this goes into the other movie we mentioned at the beginning of this episode that Living Waters has done, and that is the 180 movie. And they really talk a lot about this, but there's this element of it wasn't that suddenly overnight there was a people group that said, we need to kill the Jews. It was over time, there was this lie that perpetuated throughout all the people that they're not really people.
Right.
There was a strong argument that there's races, and there's certain races that aren't human beings. And obviously what the Bible holds to is that we're all one race. We're all the human race, and every life is precious. But as soon as you start having man, like you talked about earlier, dictate what is precious, what is not precious, what is valuable, what's not valuable, what's human life, what's not human life, you can have potential for an entire world war. And that's what happened in our history. So
there's an end to this section in the documentary, and then they switch gears toward the end of it and go another direction after they kind of finish talking about the subject of abortion, and I want to talk about that. But before I do, the last thing that I noticed was they said they're asking people who gave the reason that in cases of rape or incest, should we punish the child for the sins of the father? Unequivocally, everyone said no. We should not punish the child for the sins of the father. The one guy, he said, not in America. I don't know what that meant. I wasn't sure what he was talking about. But
that guy seemed a little annoyed by the question. And he was like, this guy was also asked the question you led with in this episode, and that is,
should we kill it?
Like, no, it's the whole, like, it's okay to kill a baby when. And he was just stuck on that. And he's like, I see what this guy's doing. I feel like at that point in the interview with what you just said, he was going like, okay, this guy's just leading me to all these answers. I don't want to give him the answer he wants, so I'm just going to say, not in America, like.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Just for the sake of not giving him the answer he was looking for.
I think it still comes down to value. A person is not of greater value because of the circumstances that surround their conception.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the same way that children born to wealthy parents are not more valuable than those that are destitute, a child who is born in a relationship that was loving is not more valuable than a child who is born in a condition where the parents didn't even know each other, be it consensual or otherwise. Right? It's not to say that what's happened isn't wrong. If something like that does happen, it's definitely wrong. It's wrong 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But we don't compound the wrongness by murdering the child.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
You don't punish the child for the sins of others,
the father,
or anyone. Yeah.
Yep. So I'd like to change gears and go on to the last part of this. Did you have anything more to add?
I had a little bit more notes here. One thing I wanted to cover was, I think about midway through the documentary, they give this quotation, and I think this is on the heels. I thought maybe I had put this here, but maybe not. I know that there is a, I think it was Princeton University. So like actual like authorities on, because I don't have his name, but there's well-known people who have studied this. So like this is speaking to the crowd who would say, well, the experts. There's a resounding consensus that's happening, where the experts even will say, oh yeah, this, it's not a clump of cells because what's in there constitutes life. Like, scientifically speaking, we're not even talking religiously right now, because a lot of people say this is the religious argument. Well, the religious argument, actually, if you want to go that route, it says that before you were in the womb, I knew you, and like Jesus knew us from the foundation of the world, and all those things. So that goes way beyond before conception. But if you want to talk about the scientific, the medical answer, like biologically, anatomically speaking, conception is what those experts actually agree. Now, you'll have some doctors that deny it, but we're talking like actual written evidence that people say. And this is why some of those same people who are experts in this area and say, yeah, it's a human, those same people who are forgoing that argument, saying it's a human being from conception, they're actually debating in universities about how maybe there should be late-term abortions so late that it's 30-day. You have a 30-day trial with your born child out of the womb. And if that person just finances aren't what they were a month ago, you're just too stressed about it. All the whatever. Like there's this whole paper on reasons why they're debating already in universities. Should we allow people to just terminate? Because that's how it'll be worded, right? If that goes through, terminate a post-born fetus, whatever you want to call it, because that you may think that's crazy, but that's what's actually being debated about. But here is one thing that Justice Harry Blackmun in 1973, in the midst of Roe versus Wade, this is what he was quoted saying: "If prenatal personhood is established, the case for abortion collapses. For the fetus's right to life would then be guaranteed specifically by the 14th Amendment." So it's all like we talked about medically speaking, professionally speaking, right? Now we're talking about legally speaking here in America, and maybe that's where that guy was going from. If legally we take what medically and scientifically has been proven, and they're a person in the womb, then legally it's violating the 14th Amendment. And that doesn't matter what the states decide, what the country decides, because recently that was overturned, right? What the country said about it. But the 14th Amendment, and maybe I didn't look really into that case where it was overturned, but maybe that was a strong argument for it, was the 14th Amendment. But basically, it all breaks down. That's why it's so important. That's why the title of this video is called "What Is It?" Because everything in this debate hinges on that. It totally changes based on what you view it to be. And that's why a strong question in this is, are you sure? What if you're not 100% sure what it is? If you're only 99.9% sure of what it is in the womb, then based on that 0.1%, it would behoove you to remove all doubt and know for sure. And I'm not saying take a legal person's opinion or a doctor even. I'm saying it would behoove all of us to see that in the womb, and you make the conscious decision. Do I believe that that is a human being in there, or is it not? And then you decide for yourself, because we're talking about human life earlier. Dan, I think you mentioned in that building analogy, you would want to see it for your own eyes and look at the top of that building and all the corners confirm before you unknowingly ended a human life, because you wouldn't be able to live with that, right?
Right.
And that's why this whole discussion is so hard for a lot of people. And that's why, Dan, I'm thankful that you started out the episode that way, because if you've been through this already, there is grace for that. God wants you to not live in that reality anymore, but also there's forgiveness and you can turn your life around and all those things. But understand too that that right there is why this discussion is so important. Because now that you know what it is, you have to know what it is. And that's why it's so important to talk to people before they make that decision, like Dan said at the beginning of the episode, that you can't take back. But it is hard for people to admit it, especially if they've already done that, because then if I were to admit that it's a human being, I will be admitting to murder. And so some people can't get past that. So, all this to say, when the Justice Blackmun had said the personal personhood is established, the case for abortion collapses, that's why a Bible culture is vital to society, and that is why life and faith is so important to society, because if our authority on what is defined as personhood, then the answer is clear as day in God's word. And I've got maybe some little tiny stuff there, but I'm going to defer to you.
It's troubling to me when we talk about what is appropriate is legally defensible, because I would like to see this topic be spiritually defensible, right? Because they could just simply make a law that says that a person's not a person, and that ends it.
Yeah. Maybe they want to abolish the 14th Amendment even. Right.
And there'd be what they don't realize, or they do realize, and they're just the citizens hold their feet to the fire a little bit, is that they can kind of just say anything they want, and that is kind of been, I'd like to see the world appeal to the spiritual on this one and say, no, I've said this before, maybe not on this podcast, but you're not nationally identified, right? You're not identified by your gender.
Yeah.
I almost said by agenda.
Yeah.
By agenda. You're not identified by your gender. You're not identified by your economic or social position. You're identified by your spiritual self.
Yeah.
And your spiritual self, if you are a believer, identifies with Christ and that alone. And it couldn't ever be about any of that other stuff, because if it was, then Jesus died needlessly.
Yeah.
So, and he didn't die needlessly, and there is the source of that is the source of the issue. It's like I had this pastor that used to say, if sin isn't the problem, Jesus isn't the answer.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's always the problem.
Yeah.
It always comes back to Adam.
Comes back to that. All the world's biggest problems comes back to that. Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, I like you tied in well with what I was just talking about, like why Bible culture is important, because it does need to stand before a spiritual defense, like you're saying. The issue we have right now is less than ever in America's history do we have people who value anything that anybody has to say about a spiritual defense, because they say, well, I'm not spiritual, I'm not religious, that stuff doesn't matter to me. It should, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't. And how do we get back there? You can actually say that what's the answer to what is it lies in another ministry of this Living Waters that Dan mentioned in the beginning, and that is the way of the Master. The way of the Master is all about how you talk to somebody in just a normal everyday conversation and lead them to the point where they're faced with basically, for lack of better words, their own depravity, and then to realize their need for a Savior, right? And that you don't answer this question, like Dan said, by legal defense, by medical defense, all those things. This argument goes away if everyone sees their need for a Savior, and then suddenly they have the Holy Spirit indwelling within them, and then the spiritual things do matter to them, and they can discern them, right? The Bible says that as we have the Holy Spirit, we can discern spiritual matters. Then I firmly believe that this whole argument would go away if it were just solely dependent upon a spiritual defense, like Dan said. So that's why I said earlier, like, that's a Bible culture. We only have that if we are reaching the lost. You want to do something about abortion. It's not like Dan said, the best case is not necessarily going out on the streets and confronting people about, like, what do you think about this? And what was that question that you phrased in the beginning about, like, it's okay to kill a baby? Like, the answer is not that. It's in approaching somebody about their need for a Savior. That you say that, well, that's a roundabout way of doing it, but no, that's the most surefire way to get everybody on the right side of this, is to talk about their need for a Savior. And God's Word has all kinds of things to say about it. I won't belabor this, but it says in Psalm 139:13, it says, "Thou hast covered," which means to weave together, "me in my mother's womb." God saying that you were a person in your mother's womb. Isaiah 44:24, "Thus saith the Lord thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb." Luke 1:41, this is the last one. It says, "And it came to pass that when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the greeting, that the babe leaped in her womb." God's acknowledging that was John the Baptist. He's leaping at Mary's presence because she's pregnant with Jesus. He gave him a name. He talked about all these things because there's no doubt in God's mind there. It's clear that God views those as human beings. So ask yourself, based on this, what should my heart and attitude be towards these things? And there's also people make the argument, well, I can't take care of a baby. Well, I want to throw this out there real quickly. The answer then is not abortion, it's adoption. There's somebody that will love and take care of that baby. And the reason why this is such an important topic, the reason why we're covering this here today, is because this is what's at stake here. 61 million babies were murdered through abortions since it became legal in 1973. It's probably more than that at this point. 35 to 45 million babies are murdered in the womb every year worldwide. So now we're not going about just the United States. Worldwide, there's that many. That's a genocide. That's unspeakable levels. Like, you can't, saying those words, you can't, it's far removed from understanding just how many human lives that is. And ultimately, why is this important? Why would we include this in Life and Faith podcast? Well, Proverbs 24:11-12 sums it up like this: "If thou forbear to deliver them that are drawn unto death, and those that are ready to be slain, if thou sayest, Behold, we knew it not." So basically you're saying, I didn't know what it was. What is it? Well, I didn't know. That's your defense, right? "Doth not he that pondereth the heart consider it? And he that keepeth thy soul, doth not he know it? And shall not he render to every man according to his works?" We're not just you, the individual, but you're also, we are to stand up for the voiceless in every age and every time. There's still slavery going on all around the world, and that's terrible. Actually, the biggest slavery is child slavery. There's another great movie that maybe we could review at another time, but that recently came out that the slogan for it was, "God's children are not for sale." those defenseless children need somebody to stand up and advocate for them, just like the children in the womb need somebody to advocate for them. So, yes, this is a tough subject. Dan put it very delicately in the beginning, like, please get some help if you need help. And that's all very important. But why would we talk about something that's such a sensitive topic to people? It's because this is what is at stake. And I hope, our message comes across loud and clear that we're very sensitive to these things. But at the same time, we have this burden for speaking up for the innocent, right?
Yeah, it's a topic that is on the hearts and minds of people, especially if any legal decision gets made, either for or against. Every election cycle, it seems to be on the, and there are people who consider it their primary issue where voting is concerned. They absolutely will not vote for someone who is pro-abortion, even if they were, I think it's hurt
the opposite too.
Yeah, I think it's hurt the Libertarian Party a lot, because they sort of have traditionally come out and said they're pro-choice, but not necessarily that they're pro-choice, but just that they don't believe government ought to be making decisions.
Yeah, they don't advocate for the murder of people, but they also, their stance as libertarians says the government shouldn't tell us what to do.
Yeah, and I wish they would double down on their opinion about that and tell Christians, like, make it clear to Christians, because I don't think enough Christians understand it. Do you know what I mean? I think they sort of they hear, because they don't, I think the libertarians, they sort of deprioritize the clarity of that in the mind of a Christian, right? Because a Christian who is in favor of small government, or who is in favor of something like that, who would benefit greatly from the libertarian candidate, will not vote for them and vote for the Republican, because they're anti-abortion.
Yeah, that's an important issue. And what it boils down to is you have to decide for yourself politically, are you small government or no government? Because when you reach no government, the government doesn't even step in and check things that are God's law. Like, that's ultimately, government is an institution by God. There's three institutions. There's the family, there's the church, and there's government. Government done God's way is seeking justice for all, like God's justice. That should be their moral. Government's moral compass should be God. Now, we know how the state of our government is. I don't think I have to belabor that point, but you can still have small government, in my opinion. I'm just giving my opinion here. You can still have small government, and that government only existing to enforce what God says is right and wrong. When you go outside of what God says is right and wrong, that's when you get I'll throw in a little southern term here. That's when you get too big for your britches, and your government is too big, and ours is far too big.
Yeah.
So, but if I was sitting across the table from a libertarian, that's just how I would go about it. Is maybe I don't fit into that libertarian mold because I say there's certain things that government should weigh in on, and then because their argument, and I hear it, is it's a slippery slope, because as soon as you tell government they could dictate this, they'll start dictating other things that they shouldn't, right? But if the government, and again, I acknowledge our country is not in this state at all, but what government should be doing is lining up with God's word. And if you're sticking to that, that's, and that's what our founding fathers, they tried to do with our government, is put all these checks and balances into place to check itself. It's just, man, after 200 years or so, it's really falling apart. Yeah.
The need for honest people is high, and honest people don't win elections.
Yeah.
So that's
this two-party system that we've got going on is really
my grandfather, he goes, which one do you like? He always wants to know where I'm at. And I say, I don't think I would trust anybody who spends $400 on a haircut to manage money for me.
Yeah.
If you don't have enough sense to disregard a $400 haircut, you're not economically wise. you're not a good steward of money at that point. You're just spending money to win.
Yeah.
Well, you are sitting across the table from a libertarian, and and the way I look at it is the idea is you make it as small as possible, and the citizens hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two pieces of that puzzle. It's always we want to make it as small as possible, and then go back to watching TV at night, and that you have to be vigilant.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just take their power away and ignore it and not hold them accountable.
Yeah. And
then say, small government works,
mm-hmm.
right? It's not just that. It's take their power away. Because this is the deal. And this is like, one of my pet peeves is when someone will cite that verse in Romans that's like, we would be subject to government.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're the government.
Mm-hmm.
They are subject to us.
Well, yeah.
And we're the head and they're the tail.
Yeah.
We're the dog, they're the tail. And we don't control that. We don't get in there. We don't get involved and stuff like that. And then they run rampant. And then they
there
say,
should not be a divide.
You want to set it and forget it? Just set it and forget it. And we'll take care of the rest for you.
Yeah.
Don't go back to watching Dancing with the Stars.
Mm-hmm.
And
the people that they pay the most, right? The entertainers.
Yeah. And we'll take care of it. And don't worry about anything else, and that's how you get where we are now is because the people aren't as involved. And then you get lawyers involved and they write documentation and legal documents that make no sense to normal people intentionally so that they intentionally confuse the situation so that regular people can never, it would be a full-time job just to understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
Like if you've ever read through anything, like there's apps you can download that are like, that'll show like what all is being considered in your government level. And if you can decipher any of that, then you are,
it's intentionally by design confusing for the average citizen.
Well, then what citizens do is they get really, hyper focused on one issue.
Mm-hmm.
For my grandfather, it's jobs.
Yeah.
He cares more about that. That's his main issue. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So the rest of that stuff, not to say he doesn't care about the other things, but one person cannot possibly care about literally everything to the level that it would require in order to get to, you know what I mean? It's like you can't possibly know everything there is to know about a specific subject because there's just too much going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So like, say you really care about the environment. Okay, and maybe this guy has a great environmental record or whatever, and that's your thing. So you'll vote for that guy because he's the guy that talks about environment all the time. But maybe that person has like a really terrible track record with the arts or education, right? It doesn't always have to be about abortion or taxes or whatever, but it can, you know what I mean? You just don't, there's no way to really fully know where this person stands on literally everything. And there's no way to really know that person.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? How many people have you known that seemed really cool at first, but then turned out to be like somebody you wouldn't trust with, with a Happy Meal, let alone, do they even have Happy Meals anymore? I think they do.
Yeah, I think they do. Yeah. What went away, sadly, is the big kids meal. They had that for a while when I was younger. Yeah.
Just looking for that Hot Wheels car. So if you're struggling or you need help, refer to the show notes and I'll have links in there for everything you might need. You can look at heartchanger.com and also want to recommend a book by Randy Alcorn called Why Pro-Life. And that's a really great quick read, short read that will help you. And it's not just, I think there is some biblical stuff in there, but it's basically just a argument by argument, line by line. Okay, you say that, but listen to this. See what you think. And it's a game changer, and it's really short read, and it's really easy to understand. So yeah, Right to Life, that Randy Alcorn book, heartchanger.com. The movie is, what is it?
Mm-hmm. By Living Waters.
By Living Waters.
Then if you're hungry for more of that kind of content, they also produce a few years back another short documentary. It's a little shorter than that one, maybe about 35, 40 minutes, but it's called 180. 180
is good, yep.
That's really good, yep. But definitely go see the documentary if you haven't seen it. We tried to give a good review of it, what our opinion is of the video, but definitely go see it for yourself. Give them a view. If nothing else, you're supporting the message that needs to get out. Even if you don't agree with everything, still it's a worthy endeavor that they're embarking to talk about, that we should all be supporting as Christians, for sure.